Okay. Well, I'm going to warn you right now. I'm a huge fan of yours. I've been talking about your work for a long time. John Dies the End is one of my favorite things in the world. So thank you for that. And
Great.
Zoe has been phenomenal. So I don't know how you just decide I'm going to start a whole new series and it'd be completely different than this horror psycho soy sauce adventure, but well done.
Thank you. Now, I don't know if you had an intro. You don't have a fancy intro. You do. You don't have a theme song.
We do. You want to hear the theme song?
Sure.
I recorded it myself. Talking with words.
Is that kind of thing? All right. Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
We're all in house here, so it's very simple stuff.
I understand.
So Zoe just came out. How's it? How's it doing? I mean, you've got to have what 2 weeks, a week.
Yeah, and we've been very fortunate. I think that joining TikTok last year probably saved my writing career, but the pre-sales on Zoe 3, Zoe is too drunk for this dystopia, were more than for Zoe Part 2, which if you know anything about the book or publishing world, that is highly unusual. Usually you release a book and then, you know, some of the people who read the first one hated it. So then you kind of your sales go down from one edition to the next. But in both of the series I do, these and the John Dies at the End novels, they've continued to stay very consistent. Like the fourth John and Dave book that came out last year, that did better than part three. And I credit that to TikTok. I have alerted a new generation of readers to my work, because the other places where I post and all that people know the books are coming, they're all dying.
Yeah.
Twitter and X and Facebook feels like a ghost town a lot of times. There's not many places left, but TikTok has been a lifesaver. I've gotten lots and lots of followers there, more than any other social media thing I've ever done.
You've got 300,000 plus, something like that, right?
Yeah, around 350,000. I started last year. So all of that was accumulated in 15 months. I started in late August of last year. And just I did it because people kept insisting that I go on there because that's where the audience had went. And I did not want to do that. Video is not my thing, and performing is not my thing. But that's kind of where the world went. Uh, it's because I never, for example, I never got a foothold on Instagram because I don't live a very aesthetic life. My meals are not very photogenic, so I never I never had things to take pictures of other than my dog. So that never I never got a lot of traction there. But yeah, TikTok has been a lifesaver. If there's any aspiring authors out there in the sound of my voice, if you're not on TikTok, you probably need to get on there.
I think we were just talking about that. We have
Yeah,
to
we
do
were.
something. We're getting old now.
Yeah, lots of podcasts do it. They all find different ways to they'll find one like really good exchange with the guest or their interview subject, one 30 seconds, 45 a minute long, just a really interesting exchange, and clip that and put it up on their channel, and people will discover the show that way. I think most of the big podcasts now, they all put clips to TikTok.
It makes sense. I mean, you've lived a fairly private life for a long time, being David Wong for so long. Does it feel weird being Jason again and going out
Yes.
and doing your face on camera? And
Yeah, because this happened in stages. When the internet was new and fresh back in the late 90s, when I started, at a time when most American households did not yet have internet in their home, it was just a text based platform. So I and everybody wrote under pseudonyms. We all had like, hacker names or whatever, and I used the name David Wong because it was a character in a story that I had written that had not been at the time published anywhere. It was an inside joke for myself, but then wrote as this, like, put the name of the fictional character on the work, and it was just like a meta joke, like, this is because the whole point is the story he's telling is ludicrous. So the idea that this is an autobiography is so stupid. But did it because that was just normal back then. You know, if you followed a popular blog, you most often did not know the name of the person writing the
Right.
blog. You knew them by some character name. But that was before even photo based stuff became popular, with which is what social media brought, where social media started to want your face. And like Facebook, their whole deal, people forget how revolutionary this was, that Facebook wants your real name, your real information on there. And prior to that, like that, MySpace wasn't that way, Tumblr wasn't that way, but Facebook was. And then starting around to, I got my first book deal in 2007, and on those books, things were registered. It had the pseudonym on the cover, but in the about the author section had, Jason Pargin is, currently lives with his wife in Illinois or whatever. And then when I got the job at Crack, same thing. Like at that point, you could no longer. That was the maturation of both the internet and my life as a writer, where it starts to have my real name out there, but did not have my real face out there or my real voice until I started turning up on the Crack podcasts in, I don't know, 2010, something like that. And then over time started to put my face on things, and then have got to a point where social media evolved to not just demanding your real name and your real face and your real voice, but it needing to be about your real personality and your real
Right.
life to a certain degree. And that is not my preference. I liked it better when it was, you could put the words out there and that was separate from you,
Yeah.
right? Like if people attacked the story, if they hated the story, it's like, so what? You hate the story, you don't hate me. But as the internet evolved so that the person becomes front and center, then people are more likely to attack the person and come after you,
Right.
because it's like, you know.
Clearly,
So
this is your belief, and this is something you think in your house, in those dark corners of your mind. They have to associate it with you now.
yeah, and it's just the feedback from people is different from the way it was back in the day. Like, and so I can see other authors where they've got their children on there, they've got their pets on there, they're going on vacation and taking the camera on vacation, and I still don't do any of that. Like my TikToks are usually me against a background. Like they can put in those backgrounds even if you don't have a green screen. They'll blank out the background, and I'll have something to point at, and it'll be some factoid or whatever. But I rarely get on there and talk about my life. I never talk about my wife. I never talk about my family, my siblings. I just leave all that stuff out. I never take the camera like out in my neighborhood because I don't want, I don't know, I'm trying to set boundaries, but there was a time when I wanted the boundary to be set 1,000 miles away from me.
Right.
I did not want to be perceived as a person at all. I wanted the work to be its own thing, but that's impossible now. If there's some author out there actually still doing that, either they're not worried about selling books, or they're so good that they don't need to go on social media the way I do, and like push them. Otherwise, I don't know how you do it without selling a part of yourself. Like,
Yeah.
here's me, here's my personality. Look at how wonderful my personality is. Therefore, doesn't that make you want to buy my book? Which is the opposite of how it should work, I think.
I agree. Yeah, and I do the same thing. Just pushing everything I can think of out there with my books. They're all uh, self-published, so it's even you're just running uphill the entire time. But I'm glad that there are people out there that are reading and want to have conversations about these books and these independent things that we're doing. Obviously, you're big time now, but back when you had what was it, pointless waste of time and cracked and
Yeah, that was the blog I had for in the early 2000s, and then I got hired at Cracked in 2007. So I spent like the first 8 or 9 years of my writing career on my own blog that didn't really pay me anything. And then I became a full-time writer and an author at the same time, the same year in 2007. That was the first time I really got paid to do writing work, and I was 32 at the time. So that's when my career basically started. Then I was working at the time I got hired at Crack. I was working at an insurance company doing data entry, not like writing ad campaigns. I was just taking billing forms and putting stuff into the computer.
did you? I mean, is that one of those things? you knew you wanted to do it, or you had, something inside that people would enjoy. So you did, I mean, you're doing it at night. You're taking up your own time to put these things out in the world.
I never thought that I had a path to getting published. Because remember, when I was in high school, the internet had not been invented yet. I graduated in 1993. It wasn't a thing. The technology existed somewhere, but in terms of the World Wide Web being something that everybody had in their house, that had not been invented yet. So when I was in high school and having to pick what I wanted to do with my life, I wound up going to college to get a journalism degree because I knew I like to write, I like to explain things, I like to research things. But journalism, my first job out of college was at a local TV station, local doing TV news as a producer there, and that did not appeal to me. It involves a lot of stress, a lot of sticking a microphone in the face of somebody whose house has just burned down, and a lot of trying to confront people and ruin their lives and that kind of thing. But I went into that because I couldn't think of what else I could do. I never thought I would be able to write fiction for a living because there was no pathway to that. It's like, how do you even start? You just write a whole book and then you mail it off to a publisher and then you just never hear anything. The whole thing with like how to query an agent and all that stuff, I never knew how to do any of that. And again, I'm growing up in a tiny town in the middle of rural Illinois, a town of 4,000 people. So growing up there thinking, well, someday I'll be a best-selling author, that wasn't something that wasn't a thought you had. But then the internet came along and suddenly there's this revelation like, oh, I can just type it here and it's published. It's out there. And so I took to that immediately. So in terms of having that as a hobby and just trying to write different things, and I would write movie reviews and stuff that was just dumb jokes and just any kind of an essay or onion style like fake satire stuff, just whatever came to mind, because it's like, well, geez, it's free basically. You can just
Yeah.
I had a GeoCity site in 1997, and I had like four or five of them. Just I like a Chicago Bears fan page for like a month. It just was just trying different stuff because it's like, oh my gosh, I can just. So I started to get an audience really fast, like 1998, 1999. I was just lurking on several popular message boards, and then a lot of people, I would just go there, and I got to be known on there, posting goofy jokes and stuff, and then eventually just started my own website to put all of that stuff on it. But that was the first time I thought, oh, here's a path to write things that people want to read. But the first book that you know got my career going, that was just given away for free on the internet for 5 years, and it was from that. But it was always, this is something that will get readers on the internet. Even while writing it, I wasn't thinking someday this will be a novel, someday this will be a movie. That wasn't the kind of thought that I allowed myself to have, not back then.
And you have kind of a weird, or a not an ordinary trip to getting books published and being in movies. And I heard that Don Castorelli emailed you multiple times and you thought it was a joke.
I Yeah,
Is that accurate?
he had emailed me basically out of the blue because at the time I didn't have an agent. I didn't have I had wound up self-publishing the book online, and then I had signed with an indie horror publisher who had printed a few thousand copies of it and got it into some bookstores, but we had sold, I don't know, a few thousand of them. But the sales had pretty much petered out. Like it seemed like everybody who wanted it already had it, and I had kind of like moved on. Like whatever. I wrote this weird horror thing one time. I wasn't like, what's the next book going to be? I wasn't thinking of that at all. It was John Dizian was a collection of blog posts that I had gotten published into a physical book only because people kept asking, do you have a physical copy somewhere? It hurts my eyes to read a 150,000 word story on a computer monitor, especially the old CRT monitors. So he got a copy of the book, and then he just tried to find an email address for me and asked. He's like, I'm Don Coscarelli. I directed, Bubba Hotep and Phantasm, and does anybody own, like, who's your agent? Like, does somebody own the film rights to this? And yeah, the first time I thought it was just a scam because if you're a writer, especially an amateur writer doing stuff online, you do get those messages. I mean, fake messages where somebody's offering to publish your book somewhere, but the next, later on, it's like, what? Now you pay us $500
Right.
and we'll publish your book. So to me, not knowing, I had seen Phantasm, I had seen Bubba Hotep, but I didn't necessarily know his name. So it seemed like from the initial email, one of those weird scam things I got, because again, the idea that someone would want to make a movie out of this was ludicrous, and I deleted it. And then he was just persistent. Then eventually we got on the phone, and then I had to hire an agent, not pitching them on my work or trying to convince them to be my agent, but saying, "Hey, I have a movie deal. I need you to look at it."
Yeah.
Like that's not normally how this process goes. And then once the news of the movie deal got out there, then that's when Macmillan came along and was like, "Hey, who's got the rights? Who owns the rights to the book? Like, don't you want to get it out there as a hardcover when the movie comes?" And then they signed me to a book deal, and then everything took off from that. But that was all that all happened because of Don happening to stumble across one of the couple thousand copies of this book that existed in all the world. And he got it because he had read another book from that publisher, and Amazon among its recommended, if
Oh
you
yeah.
like this, you may like this. And he just saw the title, John Dies at the End, and thought it was funny, and then read it and then claimed, he was blown away. It's like, we got to. So he contacts me, not if you're an author, it's not that difficult to sell the film or TV rights to a story, because most times it simply won't become a show. So for a few $1,000s, you can. It's very common to sell the rights and then just nothing happens.
Right.
They sit on it for a while. He contacted me like, no, this is going to be my next movie. Like this, like we're gonna. This is I'm buying this to make the movie, not just to have the rights. Which I was dubious until a couple years later. It's like, hey, we're starting production, we're casting the roles. So I that was winning the lottery. It's one thing to get the book popular, it's another thing to get the book published, it's another thing to get the book into the hands of somebody who can make a movie out of it. It's another thing for them to actually buy the rights, and by far the least likely is it actually becoming a film,
Right.
because there's this thing in Hollywood, like nothing ever gets made. Like one out of every 10,000 projects actually gets made. And so it was like 5 years later that I was flying out to Sundance for the premiere. And that the hype around that movie made the second book in the series a New York Times bestseller. And from then on, I'm officially a New York Times bestselling author. It'll say that on my tombstone. And that's all because of the movie.
Get that tattooed on my forehead. And I mean, and you also had Paul Giamatti and like Clancy Brown, all these huge horror people that were pushing for this because they loved the story so much. That's got to be surreal.
Yeah, and it was surreal meeting all of them, because I didn't go to the set when they were shooting it. I don't. The first time I saw the movie and the first time I met the cast was at Sundance. But that was cool because it's I'm not just there as a visitor. I'm going around to all the press events with the rest of the crew. I did a Q&A with the cast, yeah, with where all the fans could ask us questions after the showing, and there's all these other famous people just walking around, because Sundance is like that. It's just, there's Aubrey Plaza, there's William H. Macy, and they're just walking around the sidewalk. They're not being hustled around in limos. They're all just milling around.
Yeah.
So it was the most, again, I'm from a tiny town in Illinois. That's not the circles I usually travel in. So you know, you're just there having a conversation with Paul Giamatti or whatever. And it's just weird because these people you've seen on TV, and they're just talking to my wife about our dog or whatever. It's just
Exchanging chili
definitely
recipes.
felt like a fish out of water. But it's because it's weird to have other people's, like, their money and their fortune tied up in a thing you wrote, because it's like, well, if this thing bombs and it ruins everybody, that's kind of my fault. It was my story. So the sense of responsibility that you have of, I hope I gave them something to work with that succeeds for all of them. It's weird because movies are expensive to make.
So is there any possibility of a second John movie coming out, or a movie for any of the Zoe stories?
The Zoe novels, I sold the film rights to that before the first book was published, and it's been in development as a TV or streaming series for years. The last I heard, they were pitching it to, I probably can't say what streamer, but that all got put on hold with the strike
Ah,
because they were
Yeah.
putting together a pitch. When I say putting together a pitch, they have like a team, they have like a showrunner and a writer and people they've attached to it, and it looks like a great bunch of people. And they were going to do a pitch and probably would have done it in the spring, but then the strike happened in whenever that was, March or whatever, and then wiped out most of the year because that you pitching a show, you'd be crossing the picket line because you need the writers to pitch it.
Right.
right.
So that's still out there. I don't know. A show being in development doesn't mean it's going to become a show. It means it's just in the pipeline along with all of the other thousands of things, and you're trying to get them to finally give you the money to shoot either a pilot or a season. And until that happens, you're just in this kind of holding pattern along with countless other shows. With John Dies at the End, I've sat in on many conference calls and meetings about doing it as a series, doing another film, doing something with it to various streamers and outlets, and it's never quite come together. I believe it will eventually in some form, but it's just you're trying to find the right place. It's kind of an expensive show to make,
Yeah.
right? Because it's got a lot of effect stuff, a lot of makeup stuff. So they've got to be really confident in it, and I think a lot of other shows with that tone where it's like really gory, but also, you know, really like funny and irreverent. You see a lot of that in animation, like you see it in Rick and Morty, you
Sure.
see it in that wonderful Harley Quinn show they do on Max, where it's very brutal and violent and crazy. Um, but in terms of live action, like they did an Evil Dead series that I loved, but only lasted like 2 years.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, like when Stranger Things came along, I thought this is it because this is it's small town horror. It's got all of these elements and atmosphere. Like you could sell this as it's like a crazier Stranger Things. It's like Stranger Things if all of the kids grew up and became drunk and addicts and depressed, and the town like fell apart the way that town would from the 80s to the 2000s or 2010s. Um, but at the same time, they've probably got 800 pitches for shows.
Oh yeah.
It's Stranger Things, but Mike, do you see what I'm saying? Like the fact that that show got popular, I would like to think, well, now's the time for John Dice in, but also every single horror comedy property ever written. There's somebody, I mean, like they got an Adams Family reboot, that
Right.
Wednesday
Yeah.
show, on the back of that, on like it's horror and it's gothic, and only it'll be young, teenage girl, Stranger Things horror. So we probably are in a swarm of shows being pitched the same way. But I believe someday it'll happen. But it's really common for a property to sit out there for decades before it finally comes together as a show. It takes so many things kind of all colluding at the same time. Like you need famous people attached. You
Right.
need a streamer or an outlet that wants to do it. But I think someday it'll happen.
That'd be awesome. I think we'd be psyched to see that one.
I mean, even we were talking about uh, futuristic violence and fancy suits and the extreme violence at the end of that. I don't even know how you would do that in a film, but it's so fun to read. The Moloch coming out and doing his thing. It's like bad RoboCop.
Yeah, and you have to, if something gets made into a show, you have to accept it's going to be different because that's just the way of the world. If anybody's watched like the books or read the books that True Blood was based on, you can see how
Oh,
different they are because they're going to change things based on casting. They're going to change things based on budget, based on length and pacing, everything else. So it's possible they would decide to make it less gruesome, and you would just have to kind of go with it. It's that show on HBO Max, Peacemaker.
oh yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
that is heavily. I'm not saying it's inspired by This Book Is Full of Spiders, but there's a lot of elements of the guy lives in a trailer park There's monsters that are climbing into people's mouths and taking over their bodies, and the action is across a backdrop of empty storefronts, grimy little town.
Yeah.
It's a lot of that. Like, so again, I bring that up because it had extreme gruesome violence, extreme gore, and gore that is played for slapstick comedy at times the way they are. It is in my books, both the Zoe books and so I would like to think something like that would be like proof that it could work. But I don't know how popular that show was. And I think it would be very easy for a streamer to say, well, that show worked because one, it had superstar wrestler John Cena in it, and two, because it's based off of a famous DC property and it had the backing of DC and the Suicide Squad stuff. So that's the only reason that got ratings. Why would your thing? I don't know. But it's you're all hoping that somebody will take a chance on it because again, to do it right, it would cost a lot of money. This is it takes place in the future.
Yeah, especially the Zoe books. I think you even mentioned the dome in Vegas, how the entire city is essentially that, and what it would take to.
And it's an important part of that world. Like it's not just a particular a setting choice. The fact that the city is such an overwhelming, massive, flashing stimulus is kind of the heart of what we're talking about because Zoe does find it so overwhelming. The way that every surface in the city is like screaming for your attention, that kind of is part of the character of that story. So you kind of have to do it. Every time I see a video of that sphere in Las Vegas, I can't believe it's real. I can't believe it blows my mind that there's not ordinances against, but I guess if there's one city where they would not have any rules against having a building that does that, it would be Las Vegas.
It's a pretty impressive sight, seeing that sphere and everything that changes on, I don't know, every couple minutes with it. So it's pretty awesome.
In person?
Yeah, I was there 4 days ago, actually. I just got back from Vegas on Thursday, so it's pretty impressive.
Tell me that it looks weird because it operates at like a higher resolution than the actual landscape around it. Because like a building that's far away is slightly blurred in your vision, right? But this thing is broadcasting using however many million little pixels, and so it's like in a higher resolution than reality. It's to somehow like what he had said was that it didn't look real. It looked like it had been cropped into the skyline. It was, I don't know.
Yeah, it looks completely unnatural against everything else in Vegas. I mean, even with all the lights and everything, it looks out of place, but it looks pretty awesome as well.
When it's not going to look out of place 20 years from now, when every casino has done that to their exterior, because think of how jealous all of these other landowners are of all the attention that sphere gets, because that's all anybody is talking about now. So if you own that big pyramid thing, you've got to be thinking, we've got to hook up the exterior of this thing with LEDs, and it's got to be bigger, it's got to be brighter.
Turning Vegas into Tabula Rasa there.
Yeah, but I guess that was inevitable. Because I was thinking of like, what's the most obnoxious thing you could do to buildings in a city? It had this idea of all the towers downtown are all, because those who have not read the books, the idea is that in that town, all of the buildings are skinned with screens or with however they do it on that sphere, but they're all synced to one another. So you can have one ad that rolls from building to building to building across the entire skyline. And news reports that flash across all of the buildings, and they're all synced up with each other. And I just, it seemed like you would have a migraine every moment you existed there. But it was the theory is that you have this city, this fictional city, where you have all these very wealthy people have just bought land and started plopping down towers like Dubai, basically, only in Utah. And that they were just all competing with each other for attention. And this is what you wound up with, just this big, screaming, loud skyline that 24 hours a day is just like flashing across your windows and your car windshield and your field of vision. I don't know.
When I read the first one, the first thing I thought of was Jaws 25 or whatever from Back to the Future 2, the 3D advertisement. It's like, it's just a world of that now. and it's always attacking you from every angle. Advertisement, come eat this, come drink this, come buy these clothes.
I also love having there's holograms play a significant role in these stories. I love that technology because holograms have always been such a useless technology for doing anything. They serve no purpose, but they've been a part of the sci-fi landscape since Star Wars or earlier.
Yeah.
Star Wars, they have this very bad call technology where it makes a little hologram of the person calling you that you can talk to, and there's no advantage to that whatsoever. It's just there to signify it's the future,
Yeah.
But I love the idea of a world where people have started manufacturing those, and everybody has holograms and in their and things like that, and in their homes, because it just seems futury. But it's clear in the books they serve no purpose. It's just a thing. It's just a cool thing. Like, well, it's the future. We have to have holograms. That Star Wars said so.
And you have a great interaction in the first Zoe book where she comes across these construction workers and they're like, "We need you to do something for us." She's like, "Oh God, what?" Like, "We need you to set up our holograms on our phones. Nothing nefarious. Just we want us to see each other."
Because it's this complicated thing where you got to like do a 3D scan of your whole face. They couldn't get it right because it would be all distorted if you don't set it up just right. But everybody wants it because it's like, well, yeah, now see, it's got a little. When you call me, I pop up on your phone as a little glowing figure. It's like, yeah, but what does that do?
It's the
What's the future?
Snapchat filters.
Look how cool it is. Yeah, and then they have little filters where you can put different outfits on yourself, which totally defeats the purpose because But it's yeah, that's but anyway, most of the satire in that book from wrote it in 2014. Uh, like half of it is already out of date because the real stuff moves so fast.
But we were talking about that a little while ago. The Blink Network, which I don't think we've really talked about on some of our podcasts. We've done your books and some of that stuff, but I mean, you pretty much nailed what the world's becoming. You can't follow everybody, but everyone is sending videos of each other constantly. And I love that it's pretty much its own character in the Zoe books.
Well, and like I wrote that before the Ring doorbells hit the market.
Oh,
They
yeah.
start becoming common, where everybody has a camera on their doorbell now, and then now you can there a lot of them are networked together. So
Right.
if indeed a big crime happened in a neighborhood, in theory, you could just hop from doorbell to doorbell to doorbell and watch it play out. And that's again, for those who have not read the books, the idea is in this future, in this fictional future, they have a social media network where everybody basically has a camera pinned to their clothes, just a teeny tiny little camera, and that every car has a dashboard camera, and that lots of hobbyists and law enforcement drones are going around, and that there's security cameras, and that all of the cameras are networked together. So as a user browsing it, you basically have a God's eye view of the world. You can hop to any spot, and if a mass shooting breaks out downtown Minneapolis or whatever, you can on your phone tune into Blink and go to any feed of hundreds of people who are in the vicinity, and probably the shooter too.
Yeah.
Because again, that first book had been written before a mass shooter live streamed his mass shooting in New Zealand at a mosque with PewDiePie memes written on his AR-15
Yeah.
in white, and then live streamed it to Facebook. That happened after I wrote that first book. But the idea that everyone will get to a point where like that the only thing preventing people from doing it now of just having a camera stuck to their body that just records their life and look at how amazing my cool life is as an influencer is technical issues like battery life, things like that. So this is in a hypothetical future where you can get a small camera that can run all day without being recharged, and then it has software to just pinpoint, so you don't have to aim it. It will zoom in on points
Yeah.
of interest. If you're talking to someone, it knows to zoom in on their face. You don't have to touch it. And then once you have that, people would find it compelling, and there would be the same peer pressure to wear one and broadcast your own life that you have now, where teenagers everywhere feel pressured to be on Snapchat or TikTok or Instagram or whatever the new one is they're all using now.
And what am I going to do to bring people to my feed? That kind of inherent.
Yeah, and that's kind of the central theme of the book is what does it do to your personality when everything, because we're all a little bit phony on social media, but if you get to a point where you're always broadcasting, at some point that just becomes who you are. This character you've created to be acceptable to the broadcast audience, that's now just that's now just you, because how could it not be? You are what you do. And over time, if you decide, I don't know, there are certain foods you can't let the audience see you eating, or certain words you can't let the audience hear you using. At some point, it's not just for them. The audience's preferences rewrite your personality. And you see it happen to celebrities, you see it happen to influencers, and it seems somewhat unhealthy if you had an entire society doing it.
Yeah, you had a great example with I think it was Larry the Cable Guy, how the man that he
Oh,
was before doesn't exist anymore.
yeah, Daniel Whitney, I think it's his actual name. But when he gets credited in a movie, it's not credited as Daniel Whitney. It's credited as Larry the Cable Guy, the character, the fictional character he played in his stand-up act. And when he does press, when he does interviews, it's as Larry the Cable Guy. It's like a pro wrestler where you can never break kayfabe. You've got to be Hulk Hogan all the
All the
time, 24
time.
hours a day.
Yeah.
You go to the grocery store, you're going as Hulk Hogan. You're not going as Terry. What's Hulk Hogan's real last name?
If you wouldn't have asked, I would have
I
been
know.
able to tell you.
It's fine. But you see what I mean? And so there's this point where the fictional character you play kind of takes over, and we don't think of that as necessarily healthy in the celebrities we follow, but we're still inflicting it on our children.
Yeah, and the speed that technology is going, I'm nervous, but my kids are a little bit crazy, which I'm proud of. So I have that going.
Are they on social media?
Nope, they're very young. They're 5 and 7, so they're on lockdown still.
I have seen plenty of parents who have their children younger than that on their social media to their hundreds of thousands of followers.
Yeah, that
The
creeps me
kids
out a
have
little
been
bit.
brought up as part of the performance, and sometimes it's very adorable to record the kid saying or doing something stupid, but at other times I think that kid did not consent to that. And they're going to be 25, and their video of them, that whatever they did that made them go viral, that's still going to be out there.
Yeah, my kids do short films with us. But that's pretty much it. They don't have their own stuff at all, because that you see about people following them and then physically following them, and then the obsessions and all that weird stuff that's out there. Upbeat stuff.
Yeah, and not to get too dark, but yeah, there's some real creeps out there. Yeah.
So let's talk about your new book a little bit here. We finished it. Um, we did a review on it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, about a
And
week and a half ago.
this one feels a lot more political, maybe. Was that intentional?
Not I mean, I'm worried I scare people away if I say there's politics in the book. This is a book that is not about here's who you need to vote for. There's no Donald Trump analog in the book. It's just that you have in these stories a woman who has assumed power unexpectedly, and it's different types of power. She has financial power, she has influence in the culture, and then the actual violent power that comes with running a crime family. But it was kind of inevitable that politics would get tangled up in it, because if you are a wealthy person in a city, or the wealthiest person in the city that owns half the city's real estate, yeah, every uh, little charity function you attend, you're going to have people asking you to contribute to their campaigns or to publicly back them or something. So in this book, they're having a mayor election in the city, which, like everything that happens in the city, it's incredibly stupid. But it's a case where it is a race between two candidates, one of whom is openly corrupt, the other of whom is an authoritarian nightmare waiting to happen. So she finds herself having to basically side with the corrupt guy because it's like, well, corruption we can work with, but this guy wants to be a dictator. Like this guy wants to use to springboard this to take over the world and kill everyone that doesn't look like him. So it is a very very dark satire about someone who has a lot of power but still doesn't feel like she has any choices. She's still being
Yeah.
made to choose between two bad candidates. She's still being made to make a lot of bad allies and people she would not like to be in the same room with, but it's like, well, this person is a major donor to our party and da da da. And that's kind of Zoe's life in a nutshell. That at each stage, she's kind of waiting for the power and the wealth to make her life easier, and it's the opposite is happening.
I love that she. I think the first time we read the first book, I connected her in my mind to Ashley Williams from the Evil Dead series. She makes so many wrong decisions trying to make the right ones, and it always ends up uh, bad for her. And then she realizes, oh, if I had just gone to this briefing, I would have known all of this stuff was going to happen this way. But I was too tired and I wanted to drink and pass out in the bathtub.
And not just that, it's that she is it's occurring to her that in order to run this company, the machinery of this company, she has to put her trust in people who she does not trust. But it's like they're the ones that know how to run it. They're the only ones that know how to run it. None of this is simple. So it's that thing that anyone who has found themselves in a leadership role at a job or even a club or organization where you you can't micromanage everything because there's not enough hours in the day, so you start having to delegate. But that's when things start to get really really difficult, because if you already are unsure of the righteousness of your cause or the ethics of what you're doing, and then now you need to delegate your decisions to these other people, and you think maybe they are not quite as ethical as you, or maybe they've got another agenda. So to what degree do you trust them, and to what degree are you sabotaging yourself if you refuse to trust them? Because that also happens where things simply don't get done if she doesn't delegate.
Right.
And this is something that anybody who's held even a little bit of power in their life, even if they've just run like a D&D group that gets together every week, if they're the ones in charge of it, of feeling it slip through your hands, where it's like, I had an idea of how this thing should work and what it should look like, but in order to run it, I need other people. But when you bring other people in, they start to have decision making power in that thing. And Zoe's life, being a fictional character in this dark satire of a novel, she lives just that times 10,000. She lives, it's all of that except cranked up to the highest possible degree.
When you started the novels, did you know how you wanted the suits to work? I mean, because they're an integral part, but they usually step back a little bit in the story to Zoe doing her. This is how I want to do the moral thing.
Yeah, I knew that I wanted a book where, because this is a fictional world where people with superpowers kind of exist, but not in a way that's useful at all. But they have technology that they can augment themselves, make themselves extremely strong, things like that. But that's actually not that helpful in life, to be able to pick up a car like that. That doesn't come up that often. So I wanted a case where she has a group of people around her that's like a superhero squad, but their power is just in BS. It's in being able to manipulate
Right.
reality, to lie, to seduce, to kind of, these are people who are magicians and they have psyops backgrounds and things about, and using the technology and all of their techniques to kind of manipulate the world around them. And the idea is that that's kind of the ultimate superpower, because now you can get people on your side. You don't have to kill them. You don't have to, oppress them. You can convince them to join you, or you can turn groups against each other. If they have all the guns, but if you can make this group of people with guns attack this group of people with guns, you don't need your own
Right.
if you're good enough. And so the idea was that she has these lots of enemies, lots of challenges, but she can't go about it in the way a typical male fantasy would do, which is, where you've got the Tony Soprano type, or the guy from Peaky Blinders, any of those shows where it's about being cunning, but also eventually it will come down to a knife fight in the mud somewhere. It will come down to shooting somebody in the head. And she never is presented with cases where that will solve her problem.
Right.
She's never able to just kill her way to success. She's never able to just take people out or ruin people. It's a case where to get what she needs, it's always 100 times more complicated, and about trying to play people in a way that gets the best outcome, because part of her role is to maintain peace in the city. If she was fighting a war, you're only reading it to see her win the war, but she has it actually much harder. But she has to prevent the war, and she has to make people think it was their idea.
Yeah.
And it's this very delicate dance. So that was the idea. Is I wanted it the case. I wanted to present with for myself a challenge where you have action and you have things like that, but it's not just, we're clinging to the top of a train because we've got to get this thing from a spy, and on it is a chip that has a secret code. It's not the normal action beats. It's an action beat that's about, we can't let the public think this, because if they do, they'll do this. And that's of course also where a lot of the comedy comes in, because this is
Yeah.
all, she feels like this is all far above her pay grade.
So I'm curious, how tough was it switching from the David and John persona over to Zoey switching books? Because I mean, there's craziness in both worlds, but they're, I mean, almost two totally different characters.
Yeah, and the books have a different tone, and they are, for example, just something that may not have noticed, but the John and Dave books are all written first person, to a large degree from Dave's point of view. The Zoe books are in third person, but I it's not difficult. It would be difficult if I was trying to write multiple books at the same time and having to switch. I don't know how other authors do that, because some of them do. They'll have multiple things going at once. It's like, I'll write a little bit on this, on my horror novel today, and then tomorrow I'll work on my fantasy novel or on my book of poetry. I cannot switch. Once this book is done and I've pushed the entire plot out of my mind, then I pivot to writing things from Zoe's point of view, and her, everything in her world. The tone is totally different. The way things are described is different. Her inner monologue is different. But as long as I can get back into that mode, it's fine. But if you ask me to try to switch back and forth and write two books at both of them at the same time, I would find it nearly impossible. And for example, I with my current writing schedule, where I've been releasing a book a year, I frequently find a case where I'm having to edit one while trying to write another. That's very difficult, because it's one thing to shift into that different tone and that different voice over the matter of a few weeks and kind of getting into the groove, versus having to, okay, this afternoon we have to remember what happened in this previous book because we've got edits we have to make.
Do you see with Zoey and David, the characters, there's a lot of self-deprecation, depression, all that. Is that something you see as a main character, how they can potentially overcome that? Or is that something that you just have written into it? I know everybody writes what they know and things like that. David and Zoey both kind of have that, we want to go curl up in a ball and die sometimes in every book.
Yeah, and in my case, both of those, it's more that is, it gives you like the greatest contrast with the people I know they're going to be dealing with. So when I wrote the first John and Dave book, and I wrote John Dies at the end, the whole central joke to me was that, yeah, this guy encountering the supernatural and encountering this cosmic horror and other dimensions, and he just is not in the mood to do any of that. And to me, that's that for me is never being funny, that he just does not. I don't see why I'm the one that has to deal with this. Like, I don't get why this isn't somebody else's problem, and that he's not amazed by anything he sees. He just, it's like, oh, this is going to be a whole thing now. This is my weekend, apparently. This is going to be, and he's just in a mood where he's not in, but that is like that too, because it makes him uniquely unqualified to deal with anything that's happening. And then the way he clashes with John's personality and Amy's and everybody they run into, it's just, he just wants to be left alone. And the few you get moments in those books when you see what he's doing in his spare time, and it's always nothing.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
in the most recent, in if this book exists, you're in the wrong universe. It's book 4 in the series. There's just a brief moment where Amy has to go to an eye appointment, and so you follow Dave as he just kind of wanders around killing time while she's at the appointment, and you realize when one of his friends aren't around, he kind of just floats around, and he goes to like a smoke shop and buys like a pretzel, and he's just wandering around aimlessly eating this pretzel. And it's just a fascinating little, to me, I think it's fascinating to see how someone like that spends their time when they don't have any interests
Yeah.
or they don't enjoy doing anything. And it's kind of like he's just waiting for the story to resume, and there's even like a line to that effect that he's kind of just, all right, I guess I'm just going to hang around and eat a pretzel for a while. So but Zoe, with her knowing that she's about to be plugged into this organization of people who are criminal masterminds, and they are experts, they are geniuses, they all bring their own type of genius to the world. They are wealthy and confident and competent. They know what they're doing, they know the world, they know everybody. They're, they're kind of gods of this kingdom. To me, like, what's the funniest possible person to put in charge of that? And it's this incredibly sarcastic young woman, who's grew up in a trailer park. She very much has an attitude about it. And her whole thing is when she clashes with all of this, in many cases, masculinity and people, a lot of this posturing that comes from masculine behavior when they're around women they see as lower than them, that she, again, that doesn't do anything for her. And it's when you see her face to face with these monsters and realize that she doesn't back down at all, because she has encountered monsters before where she's from. She's encountered horrible people, and she sees these guys, and it's like there's no difference between this CEO and it's my mom's last boyfriend
Right.
back in back in Colorado. Like it's she just sees right through them. These are the same people I've been dealing with my whole life. These are the same guys I went to high school with. They just happen to have money, and they wear fancy suits, and they, but they're all just puffing up their chests and trying to make themselves look like that, they're the best and brightest. And she's not there to kiss their ass. She's not there. She's not impressed by it. So in both cases, they have similarities in their personality, but it's also funny that if the two people were to meet each other, they would hate each other. They would have,
Oh yeah.
neither one of them would have anything to say to each other.
One of the other things I know, Ryan's probably tired of me here and saying it. You have every single one of your projects has something that makes me laugh out loud and repeat it to people until they're tired of listening to me. And we just finished Zoey's Too Drunk for This Dystopia, but the Pistol Wizard and the reporter lady is one of my favorite parts, where she brings out her umbrella. I laughed for 5 minutes with him trying to get back on his horse and get out of there. But every single book has some description or insane happenstance that I tell way too often, but it's amazing that you can take these little things and turn it into something completely insane, and it works perfectly. So thank you. I don't even have a question. I'm just telling you how much I love it.
Well, that's the kind of thing that I find funny, which is where you have technology, and there's so much of this, and I probably have borrowed this from Douglas Adams and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novels, where you've got technology that's amazing, but it also doesn't quite work. And so, like this guy, this is a cowboy wizard, which is a character he's created for himself, because again, in this universe, all of these vigilantes, all of these wannabe superheroes or supervillains, they're all just trying to create a brand for the social media network. And this guy's landed on, I am a magical cowboy. So he is leaving and gets on this horse, which is like a white biomechanical horse, like something you would see in Westworld or something. But to create something like that, it would be very difficult and very expensive to actually have it gallop along like a horse. So there's a moment where he climbs onto it and then it just rolls away, like its legs remain perfectly stiff and it just rolls down the sidewalk. That's such a minor thing that I don't know how funny people find that. To me, that's the funniest thing in the world. If you are very excited to see this guy's robot horse take off galloping down the street, and instead it just starts, it's kind of like rolls down on sad little tiny wheels inside of its hooves. That to me is like the funniest thing in the world. I'm glad to know at least one other person found that amusing, but
So,
it's setting up expectations that you're about to see something cool, and then it's just the dumbest thing you've ever seen or had described to you.
some of the funniest parts in your books have really nothing to do with the plot line. It's just, those little descriptions of kind of what's going on doesn't really impact anything. But there's been several times where I'm reading through one of the books or listening to one of the audiobooks, and Rob will tell me, he's like, "You're getting to the good part here." No context, no nothing. And I've texted him several times at 6:00 in the morning because I work early and I drive a ways to work sometimes, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm there, and it's hilarious. And I almost had to pull over because I was laughing so hard. So it's great and very refreshing to.
Well, you can see that, at the risk of me agreeing, oh yeah, this is all great what I write, but you can, I do feel like you can tell that I started writing these on the internet, because this was, the first stuff. John Dies at the End was my novel writing school. That was, I don't have an English degree. I'm not from a background of writers. I've always been a hobbyist. But when you're writing online, you feel the pressure that every sentence has to be entertaining. There's got to be something funny. If a character walks through a doorway, there has to be something interesting about the doorway, or else you cut it. Like that's, people have, they could be doing anything but reading your book, and they've got their browser open and they're one tab away from pornography, free pornography,
Right.
or social media, or anything, Reddit. They could be looking at anything. They've paid nothing to read it, so they have nothing invested. So I'm from a background of, the only thing keeping them on here is if every sentence keeps grabbing them again and again and again. Because if there are three boring sentences in a row, they will quit and go do something else. So I feel like that inadvertently was the best book writing training I could have ever had, because even people who are writing books that are not stupid, like I'm reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy right now, it's clear that it's important to him that every sentence be a poem.
Yeah.
That if a character walks past an old broken down church, the way he describes the buzzards around the exterior of the church plucking at a corpse, like it is described with poetry. He never allows himself to just say there are some buzzards or whatever. Everything is beautiful, and he's trying to make sure that every sentence you read is a little piece of art of its own. Uh, and I do not doubt that it is very, very difficult to write a book that way. But the way I do it, I write it and then I rewrite over and over again, and I re-edit over and over again. There are sentences that you have laughed at that sentence has been rewritten 20 times,
Yeah.
because I thought it's not this is not as stupid as it could be, or there's got to be a way to rephrase this that makes it a little bit funnier. It has been through. If I'm able to write a book in a year, it means I basically did nothing else that year, because this is not the way it is for a lot of other authors. A lot of other authors write much faster than me. Brandon Sanderson can write 7 novels in the time it takes me to write one, I think, or at least that's the way it feels. Um, my process requires a lot of going over and over and over stuff to make sure that, ideally, that every paragraph has got something that you are happy you read it, as opposed to just waiting to find out what happens. That's generally not enough.
Yeah. You mind if I read my favorite one you've ever written? This is from what the hell did I just read? And I think I finished the book and immediately started telling people this one quote until my mom got upset with me when I put it online. But let me find it. Oh, Jesus. I don't want to give anything away, so I'm going to start. The best comparison I can offer is you open your fridge to realize something was rotten in there. Then when you open the cheese drawer, you found a photo of your mother fucking a Dalmatian. I will never not laugh at that description. It gets every feeling you want established very quickly.
Yeah, and I hope that out of context, the listeners understand what's going on there. The idea is that it begins a sentence promising you that it's going to compare. It's like you think it's going to be describing you that you found some moldy cheese in your refrigerator. Instead, it was that.
I posted that in our review of Zoey is Too Drunk for This Dystopia. And the next morning I got a text from my mom saying, a Dalmatian, really?
You didn't write it.
I was like, I didn't write it. Call Jason.
You just boosted it for other people to see.
I just want you guys to experience the joy. We've got, the other thing at the end of Zoey is your next project. Is that a John project? Is that a new?
That is a new standalone novel that's not a part of any series.
Okay.
Yeah, at the end of the Zoey hardcover and at the end of the John and Dave, If This Book Exists, You're in the Wrong Universe, at the end of that paperback, there's a 2-chapter preview of next year's book called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom. And it is a standalone thriller. It is not a horror novel. It's its own thing. This is the type of thing that they advise authors not to do. If you are switching genres, which I've already done once, or if you have successful series going, that you really should only be trying to start another series. This is a one-off. This is a very risky career move, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I already groaned when I heard the guy's name was Malort and he had to get a tattoo of a Malort bottle. We've have a running joke for the last few years of giving each other Malort when they're not expecting it, and that hurt just reading it.
As mentioned that there at one time the back label was just a long, dense paragraph apologizing for the flavor. It's like, you must understand that the bitter nature of this alcohol is due to the unique way that we, almost like they had so many bottles of it returned that they had to explain to people. When you see it on the shelf, you're buying this on impulse. Please understand, it is not for everyone. It just promises so much, and this character having a Malort tattoo on his arm is like yeah, he's that fits this guy to a T. He is not for everybody.
Wormwood.
And he's wearing that tattoo. It's like a warning. It's like, once you know his name is Malort, it's like, okay, this guy's been around. This guy's been around a while and not in the best places.
He drinks liquid disappointment. Yeah, we've had you for an hour. Anything else you want to talk about with your new novel? Get that out there.
No, it's available in audio, an ebook, and all the formats. Immediately somebody will comment, well, like, I'm in Poland. They don't have it here. It's like foreign rights is a whole thing. I don't know what to tell you. You have to individually negotiate with every country's publishers. So we have it in the major markets that we could sell to. It's in the UK, but in terms of making it available in other countries, I don't think it's out in Australia. I don't know what to do about that. I'm just one man somewhere. I'm sure my agent is dealing with the publishers there, trying to get them to buy the rights, but somebody has to pay for them, and then it has to be translated into Australian. They have to insert the kangaroos and stuff.
The ace.
But no, otherwise it's because doing these podcasts, that a little insider thing here that sells a lot of audiobooks. Audio is now most of my readers is audio, and that is fine with me. I listen to a lot of books on audio, or at least I have in the past when I was constantly commuting in my car. I love audiobooks. I don't begrudge anybody consuming the books that way. So whenever I turn on podcasts, first question or anybody has is it on audio? Yes, it is. It's very good.
Yeah, I think the first
title
I was going to say, I've done them all on audio so far, with the exception of John Dies at the End and Zoey's Too Drunk for This Dystopia. And they're great.
Yeah. We've taken up a lot of your time. We appreciate you doing this.
Yes, thank you very much.
For everybody watching, after I do all my cuts here, Zoey is Too Drunk for This Dystopia is a new book, and it is out on Audible and hardcover. And Jason Pargin.
Ebook.
What else am I missing?
I think it's just that right now. Someday
it's out there.
There will be technology. We'll have it up in VR or whatever. But for now, it's just audio, hardcover, ebook.
That's what you need. You need a John video game or a Zoey video game.
Yeah, I'm sure there has been a discussion somehow, somewhere.
Some random conference room.
You know, the problem with it is that when you have a funny video game, because I try to play those South Park video games, they are very, very funny until you have a boss or something that it takes 30 attempts to beat, and you hear the same joke over every encounter. Then it stops being funny real fast. That's the only thing with funny video games. Is it you'd better hope that there are no places where the player will get stuck, because there is nothing worse than a joke that was only kind of funny the first time. The 25th time you've heard it, you want to throw it through a window, the whole machine. Anyway, but thanks for having me on.
No, we appreciate it. We love your work, and we're looking forward to the next one. And I got to go buy some people some Zoey books. Christmas is coming.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Are we recording?